The morning Jane Santos pushed her cleaning cart across the polished floors of Woodbine Mansion, she had no idea she was about to save a man from losing millions. To everyone inside that Atlanta estate, she was just another worker in a uniform, quiet, efficient, invisible. No one knew she spoke multiple languages. No one knew she once sat in rooms where deals worth more than this mansion were negotiated in a single afternoon. But when everything began to fall apart with one phone call, the life Jane had buried years ago started clawing its way back to the surface. And what happened next would challenge everything you think you know about who deserves a second chance. But before we continue, hit subscribe, like this video, and tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from, and which part of the story hit you the hardest. I believe this story found you today for a reason. Now let's get back to the story. Vincent Morrison had built his empire from the ground up: real estate, international investments, luxury development stretching across the Southeast. He had negotiated with Wall Street firms, outmaneuvered competitors twice his size, and turned Woodbine Mansion into a symbol of power in Atlanta's elite circles. But none of that prepared him for the kind of pressure sitting in his chest that morning. "Say that again," Vincent said slowly, his voice tight. Paul glanced at James before answering. "The interpreter isn't coming. Flight out of JFK got cancelled. We've called everyone. No one's available." Vincent didn't blink. "What about backup?" "There's no backup," James said, pacing near the window overlooking downtown Atlanta. "And the investors just landed at Hartsfield-Jackson. They'll be here in 20 minutes. 20 minutes. Vincent leaned forward, pressing his hands against the table like it might steady him. Millions of dollars. Years of expansion plans. His company's next chapter. All of it hanging on a conversation he couldn't even have. "If this deal falls apart," Paul started, then stopped. He didn't need to finish. Everyone in the room already knew. Vincent stood abruptly, pacing like a man trying to outrun bad news. "International investors don't close deals in broken conversations," he muttered. "They expect precision, respect, control." James shook his head. "Without an interpreter, we don't even get in the door." A long silence followed. Then the intercom buzzed. "Mr. Morrison," a voice said, "the cars just pulled up." They were here. Vincent exhaled slowly, the weight of everything pressing down at once. This wasn't the confident businessman Atlanta knew. This was a man watching millions slip through his fingers. And that's when she appeared. Not dramatically, not loudly, just a quiet movement in the doorway. A cleaning cart rolling past. Jane Santos. She had walked these halls every day for months, unnoticed by the very people now scrambling to save themselves. Head down, voice low, presence minimal, invisible by design. But when she heard the word interpreter, her steps slowed. Her grip tightened around the handle of her cart. Something old stirred inside her, something she had spent years trying to forget. Paul rushed past her. "Not now, Jane. We've got a situation." She nodded slightly, but she didn't move. For a moment, she stood there, caught between two lives, the one she had built to survive, and the one she had lost. Then, quietly, almost carefully, Jane lifted her head and stepped forward. "Mr. Morrison," she said. Vincent turned, distracted. "Jane, not now. I can help." The room went still. Paul frowned. James blinked. Vincent stared at her like he wasn't sure he heard correctly. "You can... what?" he asked. Jane swallowed, steadying herself. "I can interpret," she said. Fluently. Silence. The kind that doesn't just fill a room. It takes it over. Vincent studied her, really looked at her for the first time. And in that moment, something didn't add up. Because the woman standing in front of him didn't look like someone guessing. She looked like someone remembering. "Jane," he said carefully, "this isn't a small conversation. This deal." "I know exactly what it is," she replied softly. And there was something in her voice now. Not hesitation, not fear, but control. Paul leaned closer to Vincent. "We don't have time to gamble on this." Vincent didn't answer. He was still looking at her, trying to understand what he had missed all this time. "Are you sure you can do this?" he asked finally. Jane met his eyes, and for a brief second, the quiet janitor disappeared. "I've handled negotiations like this before," she said. A pause, then, almost to herself, "Just not in a long time." Down the hallway, the front doors opened. Voices echoed. The investors had arrived. Vincent straightened his jacket, the decision already made. "All right," he said quietly. "Let's see what you can do." Jane adjusted her grip, not on her cleaning cart this time, but on something far heavier, her past. And as they walked toward the boardroom, neither of them realized. The next few hours wouldn't just decide the future of a multi-million-dollar deal. They would rewrite the life of the woman everyone had overlooked. Because Jane Santos wasn't stepping into that room to translate. She was stepping in to take control. The silence didn't last long. Paul let out a sharp breath, shaking his head like he had just heard something ridiculous. "We don't have time for this," he said, his voice tight with frustration. "Vincent, this is a multi-million-dollar deal, not a gamble." James crossed his arms, his expression more controlled, but no less doubtful. "We don't even know if she's telling the truth. If this goes wrong, we don't just lose money, we lose credibility. In this city, that doesn't come back easy." Atlanta didn't forgive failure at that level. Not in Vincent Morrison's circle. Vincent didn't respond right away. He was still looking at Jane. Not the uniform, not the name tag. Her eyes. There was something steady there. Something that didn't match the fear that should have been in this moment. "We don't have another option," Vincent said finally, his voice quieter now, but firm. Paul scoffed under his breath. "That doesn't mean this is the right one." Jane stood still, her hands clasped lightly in front of her, resisting the urge to shrink back into the role she had been playing for so long. She had heard that tone before. Dismissal, doubt, judgment before understanding. It used to break her. Now, it just reminded her what was at stake. Vincent turned back to her. "If you're going to do this," he said, "I need to hear it." Jane nodded once. Then, without hesitation, she spoke. The language rolled off her tongue effortlessly, smooth, precise, unmistakably fluent. Not textbook, not rehearsed, lived. The room changed instantly. Paul's expression faltered. James straightened slightly, his skepticism replaced with something closer to confusion. Even Vincent leaned in, his focus sharpening. This wasn't luck. This wasn't guessing. This was mastery. Jane finished her sentence calmly, her tone measured, professional, controlled in a way that didn't belong to someone mopping floors 10 minutes ago. No one spoke for a moment. Then Paul blinked. "Okay," he said slowly, almost to himself. That's not beginner level." James let out a quiet breath. "Where did you learn that?" Jane didn't answer right away, because the truth wasn't simple. And this wasn't the moment. Vincent made the decision. "Get her ready," he said. 5 minutes later, Jane stood in a private hallway just outside the executive wing. The cleaning cart was gone. In its place, a navy blazer draped carefully over her shoulders, a crisp blouse replacing the worn fabric she had worked in all morning. It felt familiar. Too familiar. She stepped into the restroom and paused in front of the mirror. For a second, she didn't recognize the woman staring back at her. The uniform was gone, but not completely. She could still see it. In her posture, in the hesitation behind her eyes, in the years she had spent learning how to disappear. Jane reached up slowly, adjusting the collar. Her reflection shifted. And just like that, the past came rushing back. Conference rooms, long tables, international voices layered over one another, the weight of decisions that moved money across borders and changed lives overnight. She had lived in that world once, thrived in it, until everything fell apart. Her fingers tightened slightly against the edge of the sink. What if it happens again? What if stepping back into that world pulls everything she buried back into the light? What if she fails? The thought hit harder than she expected. But right behind it came another. What if she doesn't? Jane exhaled slowly. For the first time in years, she wasn't being pushed into survival. She was choosing something. And that made it more terrifying than anything else. Outside, voices echoed faintly through the hallway. Time was running out. Jane stepped back from the mirror. Not fully the woman she used to be, but not the one she had been hiding as either. Something in between. Something rebuilding. She moved toward the door, then paused, her hand resting lightly against the handle. A quiet thought passed through her mind, steady and undeniable. Some people spend their whole lives being overlooked, and the world only notices them when it's almost too late. She swallowed. If you've ever felt invisible like that, then you already understand what this moment costs. Jane opened the door. Vincent was waiting. He looked at her, and for a second, he didn't speak, because the woman walking toward him now wasn't the same one who had stood in that doorway minutes ago. There was something different in the way she carried herself. Something undeniable. Paul leaned slightly toward James. "I'll admit," he muttered, "this just got interesting." James didn't respond. He was still watching Jane, trying to figure out how they had all missed this. Vincent stepped aside, gesturing toward the boardroom doors. "They're ready," he said. Jane nodded. As she walked forward, each step felt heavier and lighter at the same time. Behind her was a life she had been surviving. Ahead of her was the one she had lost. Vincent watched her go, something unfamiliar settling in his chest. Not doubt, not confidence, something in between. Because deep down, he knew one thing. This either saves everything, or it destroys it faster than anything has ever seen. And as Jane Santos reached for the boardroom doors, the woman no one saw coming was about to become the one no one could ignore. The double doors opened slowly, and just like that, the air changed. Inside the boardroom, everything felt sharper, quieter, but heavier. Sunlight stretched across the polished table, reflecting off glasses of water and neatly arranged documents. 3 investors sat waiting, their presence calm but commanding. Their suits were tailored, their posture precise, their eyes already studying everything, including her. Jane felt it immediately. This wasn't a room that gave second chances. This was a room that exposed weakness. Vincent stepped forward first. "Gentlemen, thank you for your patience." But before he could continue, one of the investors spoke, his tone polite, but firm, layered with expectation. Jane understood every word, and more importantly, what was behind them. She stepped in beside Vincent, and when she spoke, the room shifted. Her translation wasn't rushed. It wasn't mechanical. It was intentional, measured, elegant. She didn't just repeat the words. She reshaped them. Where Vincent's tone carried pressure, she softened it into confidence. Where uncertainty lingered, she replaced it with clarity. The investors noticed immediately. One of them leaned back slightly, eyes narrowing, not in doubt, but in interest. Vincent glanced at her, then said his next line. And again, Jane elevated it. She added context where it mattered, adjusted phrasing where tone could be misunderstood, bridged the invisible cultural gaps that could quietly destroy deals like this. It was seamless, and within minutes, the room belonged to her. Paul shifted in his seat. James stopped taking notes. Neither of them spoke, because the woman they had dismissed less than an hour ago was now carrying the entire negotiation. The discussion deepened. Numbers, projections, risk. One of the investors began speaking rapidly now. Technical, led, testing. Vincent tensed. But Jane didn't hesitate. She answered, directly, clearly, with a level of precision that made the room go still. She referenced international compliance structures, compared market behaviors, framed Vincent's proposal in a way that aligned not just with American expectations, but global ones. It wasn't translation anymore. It was strategy. Vincent felt it. That shift, that moment when control returned, not because he had regained it, but because she had. Then it happened. The turning point. The lead investor slid a document across the table. A revised structure, new terms, subtle changes, the kind that could easily go unnoticed unless you knew exactly what to look for. Jane's eyes scanned the page. Once, twice, and then she went still. Vincent noticed immediately. "What is it?" he asked quietly. Jane didn't answer right away, because what she was seeing wasn't just a mistake. It was a warning. She looked up, calm, controlled, but something deeper behind her eyes. "In its current form," she said carefully, "this structure would raise serious compliance concerns." The room froze. The investor leaned forward slightly. "Explain." Jane placed the document down gently. "There are reporting inconsistencies between jurisdictions," she said. "If this is filed as written, it could trigger a financial audit, one that doesn't just delay the deal." She paused. "It could shut it down entirely." Silence. Heavy. Immediate. Paul's head snapped up. James leaned forward. Vincent felt something drop in his chest, because he understood exactly what she was saying. He hadn't just been close to losing the deal. He had been seconds away from walking into something far worse. The investor studied her now, no longer testing, evaluating. "And you're certain?" he asked. Jane met his gaze. "Yes." No hesitation. No uncertainty. Just truth. The tension shifted again. But this time, it wasn't against her. It was around her. "What would you suggest?" the investor asked. And just like that, the room handed her control. Jane reached for a pen. Her movement steady, familiar. She adjusted the document, then began outlining an alternative. Clear, structured, deliberate. "This approach maintains transparency across both jurisdictions," she explained. "It reduces exposure, aligns with regulatory expectations, and—" she glanced briefly at Vincent. "It increases long-term profitability." Now they were listening, really listening. The kind of attention that couldn't be faked. As she spoke, the energy in the room transformed. What had started as a fragile negotiation was becoming something stronger, smarter, safer. When she finished, she set the pen down, and for a moment, no one spoke. Then one of the investors nodded slowly. Another leaned forward, reviewing her adjustments. The third allowed the smallest hint of a smile. Respect. Vincent exhaled, not realizing he had been holding his breath. He looked at Jane, really looked this time, not at the uniform she had worn earlier, not at the role she had been given, but at the mind, the control, the presence, the truth, because the woman sitting beside him wasn't just helping. She was the smartest person in the room. The room slowly emptied. Chairs shifted. Papers gathered. Quiet handshakes exchanged. The tension that had once filled the boardroom had dissolved into something else. Measured respect, cautious optimism. The deal wasn't officially signed yet, but everyone in that room knew one thing. It was no longer falling apart. It was working. Jane stood near the edge of the table, her hands resting lightly against the polished surface, her breathing steady, but not calm. Not yet, because moments like this didn't come without a cost. "Jane!" Vincent's voice cut through the quiet. She turned. He was standing near the window now, the Atlanta skyline stretching behind him, glass towers, endless movement, a city that rewarded power and buried weakness. "Walk with me," he said. They stepped out into the hallway, the door closing softly behind them. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Vincent stopped. "I need to understand something," he said. Jane already knew what was coming. "You didn't just translate in there," he continued. "You led that room. You saw things my entire team missed." A pause. "That's not something you learn cleaning floors." Jane looked down briefly. Not out of shame, out of memory. "I didn't always do this," she said quietly. Vincent waited. "I used to negotiate deals like that," she continued. "International contracts, corporate expansions, high-level strategy." She lifted her eyes to meet his. I wasn't just part of those rooms. I was leading them. Vincent's expression didn't change, but something behind it did. Recognition. What happened? He asked. The question lingered between them. Heavy, unavoidable. Jane exhaled slowly, as if pulling the word from somewhere she had buried deep. Atlanta remembers headlines, she said. Not truth. She turned slightly, her gaze drifting toward the city beyond the glass. There was an investigation. Financial misconduct. Corporate fraud. Vincent's jaw tightened slightly. I was connected to a company involved, she continued. Not because I did anything wrong, but because I was in the room when decisions were made. A pause. Then, quieter. Police Chief Joe Peters led the case. The name landed with weight. In Atlanta, it always did. The media didn't wait for facts, Jane said. They ran with the story. My name was everywhere. My face. My career. Her voice didn't break, but something underneath it did. I lost everything before I had the chance to defend it. Vincent didn't interrupt. No charges stuck, she said. No conviction. Nothing they could prove. A small, hollow breath. But by then, it didn't matter. Her hands tightened slightly at her sides. Companies stopped calling. Doors closed. People I worked with stopped answering. She looked back at him now. I went from being respected to being avoided. The silence between them deepened. So I disappeared, she said simply. Not because I wanted to, but because it was the only way to survive. Vincent felt something shift inside him. Not pity. Something heavier. I took whatever work I could get, Jane continued. Cleaning. Service jobs. Places where no one asked questions. A faint, almost bitter smile touched her lips. It's easy to become invisible when people are already looking past you. Vincent looked away briefly, absorbing it. Every word. Every piece of it. Then something clicked. A detail. A realization. That structure, he said slowly. The one you stopped in there. Jane nodded before he could finish. Yes. Her voice was steady again. But I've seen it before. Vincent's chest tightened. It's the same kind of framework that triggered the investigation I was caught in, she said. The same kind of oversight. The same kind of risk. A pause. You weren't just about to lose this deal. She held his gaze. You were about to step into something that could have followed you for the rest of your life. The weight of that settled hard. Vincent ran a hand across his face, exhaling slowly. Because now he understood. She hadn't just saved the deal. She had saved him. From becoming her. The hallway felt quieter now. Not empty. Just different. Jane looked away slightly, her voice softer now. Sometimes the people we overlook are carrying stories heavier than we can imagine, she said. A beat. And sometimes all it takes is one person choosing to see them. She didn't finish the sentence right away, because she didn't have to change everything. Vincent didn't speak. He couldn't. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't thinking like a billionaire, or a negotiator, or a man trying to win. He was thinking like someone who had almost made a mistake he couldn't undo. He looked at Jane again, not as an employee, not as a solution, but as someone he had completely misjudged. And in that moment, respect replaced power, because now he knew something he couldn't ignore. He didn't just need her to close a deal. He needed her perspective, her judgment, her truth. And for the first time since this all began, Vincent Morrison wasn't the most important person in the room anymore. The signatures came one after the other. Smooth, certain, final, ink met paper, and just like that, the deal was done. But not the way it had started. Not fragile, not desperate. Stronger, bigger, smarter. Vincent leaned back slightly as the last document was signed, exhaling a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding since that first phone call hours ago. Millions saved, more millions gained, expansion secured, his empire intact. No, not just intact, elevated. The lead investor stood, extending his hand. "Mr. Morrison," he said, his tone carrying a level of respect that hadn't been there before, "this partnership will be very successful." Vincent shook his hand firmly, but his eyes shifted toward Jane, because they both knew the truth. The investor followed his gaze, then nodded once. "Your team," he added, "is exceptional." Vincent didn't hesitate. "No," he said calmly, "she is." The room stilled again, but this time not with tension, with recognition. Jane stood quietly, her posture composed, but her expression unreadable. Paul looked down briefly, then back at her, something close to humility settling in his features. James gave a small nod. No words, just acknowledgement, because whatever they had thought before didn't matter anymore. Jane Santos was no longer invisible. Hours later, the mansion had quieted, the chaos replaced with stillness, and inside Vincent's private office, the weight of everything finally settled. He stood near his desk as Jane entered. No boardroom, no audience, just truth. "You changed everything today," Vincent said. "No exaggeration, no performance, just fact." Jane shook her head slightly. The deal was already there. It just needed clarity, he interrupted gently. A small pause. "Vision," he corrected. She didn't respond, because part of her still wasn't sure how to stand in this moment. Vincent stepped closer. "I've spent years building this company," he said, "and I've hired some of the best people in the country." A beat, but today you saw what none of us did. Jane held his gaze. "I don't offer this lightly," he continued. "I want you here, not as staff, not behind the scenes." Another step forward, as part of leadership. The words lingered. Heavy, real. Jane felt it, the pull, the life she had lost, standing right in front of her again. But she didn't answer immediately. "Before I say yes," she said quietly, "there's something I need." Vincent nodded once. "Name it." Jane's voice didn't waver. "I want every service worker in this building to receive a salary increase." Vincent didn't interrupt. "And I want a program put in place," she continued, "to support their families. Education, opportunities, something that gives them more than just a paycheck." Silence, because that wasn't the answer he expected. "I won't step back into that world," Jane said, her voice soft now but firm. "It means leaving everyone else behind in this one." Vincent studied her. Then he smiled, not out of surprise, out of understanding. "Done," he said, without hesitation. And just like that, the deal that mattered most was made. Weeks later, Woodbine Mansion didn't feel the same. Not in the way it looked, in the way it lived. Staff who once moved quietly now walked with something different. Confidence, respect, presence. Names were remembered. Voices were heard. People were seen. Paul and James adjusted too, not out of obligation, but because they had witnessed what happens when you underestimate someone who's been carrying more than you realized. And at the center of it all was Jane. One evening, long after the meetings had ended and the halls had emptied, she found herself standing in front of a familiar window, the same one she used to clean, the same glass she had wiped down day after day without ever stopping to look at her own reflection. Now, she did. The city light stretched out behind her. Atlanta, loud, relentless, alive. Jane looked at herself. Really looked. Not at the past. Not at the headlines. Not at the years she lost. But at the woman standing here now. Still strong. Still capable. Still worthy. And no longer invisible. She exhaled slowly. A quiet release. Not everyone gets a second chance. The thought came gently. Steady. But when they do, her reflection didn't look away. It reminds us to look closer, to listen deeper, because somewhere, in rooms just like this one, there are people being overlooked, and sometimes they're the ones holding everything together. Jane smiled faintly, not because everything was perfect, but because, for the first time in a long time, everything felt possible. And this time, she wasn't standing outside the room anymore. She was exactly where she belonged. If you love this story, don't just scroll away. Hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from and which part of the story hit you the hardest. We've got more powerful, emotional stories coming your way. And trust me, you don't want to miss them.